Gray woke up in a circular white and silver room with narrow walls. Mechanical arms tore his clothes apart, exposing him to harsh scrubbing and cleaning. They dressed him in a floral suit with a puffy pink collar, then a mechanical arm with a white glove slapped him hard, sending him through a hole in the ceiling onto a circular platform that blended into the bright lights. Blinded Gray as a floating head announced the start of the 3021st Genesis Games, sponsored by the Munlay, who sought a seat in the Genesis Council. The host introduced himself as Smite the Great, returning after a 37-season hiatus. The crowd roared as the host revealed the theme, a cracked world, a rare event where a nascent world was thrust into intergalactic stardom prematurely. Gray fell through the floor, and the mechanical arms again stripped off his clothes, leaving him with only the floral suit jacket. The crowd's cheers echoed as words appeared before him. Scan in progress. Please select your weapon. Gray realized he had been sent back in time, reliving the same events with identical mechanical arms and clothing damage. He ran his hand through his hair, noticing the thick gel's metallic, fruity scent. The weapon projections floated before him, intangible and disappearing the longer he hesitated. The words flashed again. Weapon not selected. Please select your weapon. Gray cursed as his hand phased through the spear he tried to take, realizing it was the same weapon he had first chosen. He decided a polearm weapon was his best bet for keeping distance and protecting himself, since he only had experience with guns, not bows and arrows. He knew that in a few hours, he would discover that wearing the floral suit's upper half prevented the electronic nodes from attaching to his body, which were necessary to interact with the holographic weapons. Gray's mechanical arms had malfunctioned and failed to clothe him properly, leaving him without the sci-fi black suit with electrical circuits that connected to the nervous system and allowed touch to register in the virtual interface. Without that suit, Gray's touch couldn't register on anything, and this problem extended to the outside world, where he couldn't accept loot boxes, interact with information booths, enter safe rooms, or register at checkpoints. That changed only after he found a dead body, but the young girl's suit barely fit a bit of his arm, forcing him to strip her just to survive. His fist clenched as he remembered how the reality TV producers had manipulated the narrative, portraying him as a monster and sending him into increasingly dangerous situations based on audience votes. He pressed a palm to his stomach, recalling the knife wound he had suffered. The system flashed warnings that he had not selected a weapon and started a countdown. Gray stood still, not swiping at weapons or yelling for help, having already tried those options without success. Fury consumed him, clouding his thoughts. The time ran out, and the system unlocked an achievement for not selecting a weapon, granting him +1 strength. The system tried to interface with Gray's body but failed, warping the world around him and causing him to stumble forward. He caught himself before collapsing and found himself in an underground cave with jagged gray walls and low ceilings. The air was humid and musty, filled with the sounds of chattering teeth and rubbing. In a control room filled with floating screens, various creatures managed thousands of contestants. An octopus creature alerted associate producer Guard to a problem, zooming in on Gray's screen where he appeared in boxers and a half-torn floral suit. Guard, a man with deathly gray skin and a band revealing his brain beneath the skull, decided the cost to fix Gray's issue wasn't worth it and instructed to let him die naturally. The octopus minimized Gray's screen, treating the matter as an afterthought. Gray pulled on his collar, ripped at a small tear left by the mechanical arms, and yanked the looping fur line from around his neck. He wrapped the loop around his fist and turned left at the end of a forked hallway. Hearing a small goblin chitter, Gray wrapped the fluorescent pink fur collar around its neck and slammed a foot into its back, driving it into the ground as his biceps flexed and a cracking sound echoed. He unwrapped the collar, avoiding the goblin's juices, and glanced at the small wooden spear it held, shaking his head. He recalled that the spear was poorly made, easily broken, blunt, and too short to be effective. He considered that a heavy rock would be a better weapon. The nearby goblin village might be helpful, but Gray remembered the tunnels forked several times with 3 groups of enemies between here and there. In the distance, he saw a shimmering door he had found before, which led to a safe room he couldn't enter. The other direction led to the goblin village, which had taken him 3 hours to clear despite the small number of creatures. After hesitating, Gray chose to approach the safe room again, hoping something had changed. He stood before a steel-framed door without a handle or obvious way to open it. When he entered its proximity, a holographic signboard reading "Safe Room" appeared above it. Gray pushed at the door, but it did not move or react to him. He recalled thinking last time that he needed to reach a threshold and had put everything into clearing the goblin village, hoping for an achievement. Gray stepped back and exhaled, acknowledging the situation. Gray questioned why he had gone back in time, wondering if it was due to a mechanism of the show or something else. He considered that he had survived his first run practically barehanded, which was a miracle, but this made it more likely that time travel was part of the show. He doubted how one could fight back against aliens with godlike powers. He muttered his granddad's favorite saying about pissing on one's own grave. Gray pulled down his boxer's leg, urinated on the safe door, and accepted that this might be his best fuck you moment. A warning appeared detecting an obscene gesture, threatening penalties on the second offense. Gray laughed, then dried himself and held up his middle fingers to the air. He noticed two goblins rushing toward him, one with a bone dagger and the other with a spear. Gray faced them, grinned, and challenged them to come on. He charged forward with his fur-lined collar wound over his fists. He leapt up, clearing both goblins, dashed around a corner, and waited. When they appeared, he punted one in the head, splattering its skull against the wall. He grabbed the other, tightened his collar around its neck, and slammed it against a jagged wall until its body crumbled. Gray picked up the bone dagger and slit both goblins' throats for extra measure. He weighed the dagger in his right hand and moved away from the safe room, aiming to clear the goblin village faster than before. Peeking around a corner, he saw the village ahead with low tunnel ceilings that began to open up. The two goblins he had killed were the first line of defense. Two others remained ahead. The tunnels widened and the ceilings sloped upward, leading to another set of guards and then a final set guarding a tall, wiry fence that screeched when opened. Gray recalled the foyer had two other entrances he hadn't known before, which had allowed reinforcements during his first run. He decided to deal with the first set of guards, then wrap around to handle the others before approaching the gate. Gray moved carefully through the tunnels, familiar with them, and noted that goblins were not very intelligent. Within half an hour, he approached the front door and observed the guards at the gates. They wore worn leather armor. One carried bone axes on his back, the other held a pair in hand. The latter was taller with a long infected scar from its left eye to the opposite jaw. Gray noted this encounter differed from his first, which had been one-on-one hit-and-run tactics. Now it was more dangerous and in open space. He gripped his fur-lined collar around his fists and held a dagger in each hand. He punted a rock down an opposite tunnel. The goblins looked toward the noise and then at each other, chirping as if deciding something. They separated, with the larger goblin rushing over. Gray waited until the goblin vanished from sight, then dashed forward. The goblin, distracted, reached for its double axes when Gray was within 3 meters. Gray threw a dagger that struck the goblin's forehead. He cursed that the fight looked easier in the movies but pressed on. Gray's dagger struck the goblin's forehead, and the goblin tried to dodge but failed, allowing Gray to leap forward and punt its jaw. The goblin fell a few inches before collapsing to the ground, unable to get up. Gray drove his second dagger through its neck, then flipped it over and replaced his daggers with 2 axes, standing to face the larger goblin approaching. Gray sank into a low stance as the large goblin charged, raising one of its axes to cut down hard. Gray dodged to the goblin's outside shoulder, tracking the swing of the second axe. The goblin slashed again with ferocity, but Gray stepped back as the goblin overswinged, its arms crossing. Gray slashed down with his axe, cutting a large gash into the goblin's tricep, chipping into the bone. Gray's axe slammed into the ground, and he let it rebound into the air, cornering the wounded goblin. The goblin screeched, its arm hanging limply and one axe falling to the ground with blood. Gray circled low, then shifted explosively to the goblin's wounded side. The goblin scrambled to protect itself with its remaining arm, but Gray leapt back, trapped the goblin's axe in a fur-lined collar loop, yanked the goblin off its feet, and grabbed control of the axe. Gray released his own weapon and drove a knee into the goblin's groin. The goblin yelped and loosened its grip on the weapon, which Gray seized. He raised the axe high and swung down, splitting the goblin's skull in two. Gray's axe slammed into the ground again, causing him to stumble back as blood coated his face and collar. Gray looked toward the wiry gate made of crisscrossing barbed wire and rusted steel. He swung the gates open despite their screeching. Female goblins inside screamed as the first smoke bomb was launched at him. Gray ducked and let it roll overhead, surging into the encampment, a dingy area of crates and dilapidated tents resembling a World War I defensive line. Gray caught a smoke bomb with one hand and held an axe in the other, then placed the bomb softly on a crate without triggering an explosion. Female goblins realized his tactic as he caught a second smoke bomb similarly. Suddenly, a pipe bomb was thrown through the air toward him. Gray jumped into the air, caught the pipe bomb, and landed on the ground. He took a heavy step forward and launched the pipe bomb back, his arm whipping through the air. The pipe bomb exploded, sending a wall of hot air that Gray shielded himself from with his arms. 2 more explosions followed in quick succession, creating a larger chain reaction that hit him in waves. Gray was rocked off his feet and flew backward, hitting the ground hard and coughing. He realized he hadn't accounted for everything but confirmed he hadn't been hit by shrapnel. A dense wave of smoke from the bombs and smoke bombs wafted out. He clicked his tongue, wondering if the smoke bomb he had set aside had survived. He lay on the ground, lifted his axe, and cursed under his breath. Then he pushed himself up, ignoring his scrapes and bruises, and moved through the sea of smoke, covering his mouth with his floral suit. He searched for the smoke bomb he left behind but thought it might have been triggered or knocked off the crate by the blast. Gray noticed a door at the far end of the encampment, a large wooden door opposite the wiry gate entrance in the underground cave system. The explosion had cracked the door, creating a sliver through which Gray saw another goblin standing with its head lowered and hands resting on a large rusted blade. Gray pieced together that another group was responsible for the girl's death and was taking advantage from the back while he dealt with the goblins. Suddenly, he heard voices approaching. Two young men, Fitz and Ray, peeked around the wiry gate's corner, unable to see through the smoke. A young girl stood behind them silently. Fitz argued with Ray about entering the encampment despite the danger, insisting risks were necessary. Ray reluctantly agreed, gripping his heavy greatsword as he prepared to move forward with Fitz covering him. On the other side of the smoke, Gray heard Ray's sword piercing a crate and causing noise. Gray considered his options, knowing the smoke would soon clear and hiding places would diminish. He recalled the valuable room where the goblin boss hid, understanding that defeating the goblin would yield better weapons and armor, but he couldn't interface with the rewards fully. He debated whether to wait for the others to tire or to act himself, conflicted about killing fellow humans who might not be innocent. Gray worried that clearing the boss room might trap him in the tutorial zone forever, as the area beyond was where the real game map opened. Gray suppressed his annoyance and moved slowly to one side, curving around the room to avoid the others. Ray walked forward slowly, his earlier panic replaced by embarrassment. He noted that despite his noise, nothing had attacked him, which made him think Fitz was right about the explosion having taken out everyone. He looked back for Fitz but couldn't see him. Fitz had retreated and was pressing a palm to his chest, muttering a curse before calming down and walking forward with more confidence. Gray stopped at the gate opening and slipped outside, but froze when he saw a familiar young woman staring at him with her palms over her mouth. He watched as the spear she held fell to the ground and immediately ran. A clang echoed, and both Ray and Fitz, who hadn't gone far, looked back. Gray sprinted down the hallways, turning repeatedly until he reached a small nook where he stopped to catch his breath. He recognized the nook from his first run, knowing it concentrated sound toward him and was away from the safe room and goblin encampment. He hit the back of his head against the wall and curled up, aware that his fur-lined collar was caked with blood and goblin saliva he couldn't clean off. He decided to sit and wait, closing his eyes and breathing rhythmically as the sound of something approaching faded away. Ray rushed to find Fitz and May standing near each other without danger nearby, his heart racing. May said someone had been there but had left, though she hesitated to explain more. Fitz interjected that the person had run away, probably afraid of their numbers, and that the man had been running around in his underwear, making him unreliable as a teammate. Ray suggested adding him to the team for strength in numbers, but Fitz disagreed. They discussed a wooden door with a crack at the end, behind which a goblin appeared to be sleeping on its feet. Fitz confirmed it was likely the encampment boss mentioned in the safe room introduction, and Ray agreed. Fitz noted the madman had probably dealt with the encampment, leaving only the boss fight to clear the tutorial. They planned to move quickly to be among the first and earn the promised reward. Gray opened his eyes, having only rested briefly. He felt less fatigued than usual and pushed himself out of the nook, landing softly. He decided to check if the others had finished fighting the boss, acknowledging that despite his own efforts, the team had advantages like numbers and interface suits that boosted their physical fitness. Turning a corner near the safe room corridor, Gray stopped when he saw a familiar young girl lying dead in front of the safe room, her throat pierced by an arrow. He remained still, knowing he needed her suit to register, even though it wouldn't allow entry to the safe room or opening loot boxes. He closed his eyes to keep calm. Once players left the tutorial zone, they entered the main map, one iteration among thousands, but initially confined there. A ranking system tracked players who left the tutorial zone, and the first zone-wide event required reaching a marker and registering. Upon completion, a player's name, level, and feats synchronized with their zone. Failure to register within the time limit resulted in execution. Gray had struggled to use the young woman's suit to register but failed repeatedly. By chance, one attempt succeeded. He unzipped her interface suit, pulled her arms out, then slid it down beneath her waist and legs. Standing up, he slipped his hand and forearm into a sleeve, discarded his fur-lined collar, and wrapped the leg sleeves around his other fist. He tucked a broken arrowhead into the back of his boxers and gripped his two bone axes. In the associate producer guard control room, an octopus creature manipulated several screens. It noticed Gray's screen, double-tapped it, and rewound the scenes in rapid 10-second increments. The creature paused, long-pressed the screen, and wrote comments on a sticky note that transformed into a virtual envelope. After several taps, the envelope changed colors from white to yellow, then fluorescent, and finally pale pink before the creature sent it out, noting the zone was lax on characters. Associate producer guard sifted through many virtual envelopes, mostly white, some pale yellow. A pale pink envelope rose to the top, and guard clicked it, reviewing several scenes before nodding and instructing Cauldron to move forward with a villain plot. plotline. Guard advised emphasizing the pervert aspect due to the lack of a Nexis suit, suggesting a storyline where the character preferred wearing less or women's clothing. Guard requested updates and mentioned that survival through registration could earn a story credit. Cauldron smiled, recognizing the opportunity to advance his career, knowing that story credits were valuable for influencing main storylines and generating viewer interest and revenue. Gray stood in the goblin boss room, which showed signs of battle but little struggle. He stepped down a set of stairs as the floor opened and the world warped around him. His vision cleared inside a bubble floating through white space among many others. A message announced Gray as the 113,472nd contestant to leave the tutorial zone. He noted his improved ranking compared to before and wondered about rewards for higher ranks but dismissed the thought. Another message assigned him to Zone 234. Gray's bubble popped, placing him in a city square where confused people gathered in groups. Many noticed he wore a Nexus suit only around his fists instead of on his body. Fitz's eyes briefly showed shock upon seeing Gray, but Ray remained focused on the ground. A breaking news alert appeared above Gray's head, prompting him to run. He pushed past two men who shouted in anger but did not look back as he ducked behind a building. He focused on gaining speed and avoiding other sight, recalling that standing in the open last time nearly cost him his life. Rage fueled his next moves. In the city square, the floating words remained as some people considered Gray a madman. Their attention shifted to the floating head of Great Udon, also known as Smite the Great, who appeared without sensory overload effects for the first time. His skin showed leathery forest gray tones with gold tattoos forming symmetrical patterns resembling warrior paint or runes. Gray saw the projection from a rooftop and recalled that Great Udon had not appeared last time. Instead, they had explained the next round, shown feats, and ended with him. Gray remembered how his heart sank when a video played of him stripping the young woman's clothes, edited to suggest a disrobing fetish. Gray had not tried to explain. He thought people were stupid even in times of peace, let alone when ripped from their lives and thrust into an overturning world. He sensed this situation had a more sinister feel. Great Udon's nickname came to mind, and Gray picked up his pace, running faster. He did not know that this change was all his fault. There was only one main host who could appear in limited places and was selective. Previously, Gray had taken longer to clear the tutorial zone, so Great Udon had been occupied elsewhere. Also, if Gray was not seen as decently strong, the celebrity host did not prioritize his storyline. Now, Great Udon made time. Great Udon spoke to the candidates, congratulating those who had made it far and explaining that they were among the top percentage. He warned them of the cruel and savage who took advantage of the weak. He instructed them to leave the city to find unexplored shrines, light them up, and officially register, as only this would allow return to the city without elimination by the fog of chaos. He described the shrines as central hubs for upcoming challenges and the fog of chaos as a poisonous fog lethal on contact. Great Udon then introduced a tragic tale. Projection appeared, showing images of a young girl. Gray cursed and looked over his shoulder, nearly erupting. Unlike last time, when only tutorial zone content was shown, Great Udon displayed pictures resembling the young woman's social media, some possibly not personally recorded. The projection included a scene of a little girl expressing a desire to be a ballerina and firefighter, with an older woman encouraging her. The words "Mommy believes in you" echoed hollowly. Hearing the name May, both Fitz and Ray froze, paling until the next clip played. The young woman entered the games full of life and spirit, wanting to help people. Then, an arrow appeared on screen, slicing her throat, fired by an unseen assailant. The scene cut to Gray pulling her suit off and trying to fit it onto himself. Great Udon remained silent for a long moment before his floating head vibrated. Fire spurted from his eyes, and he roared that the perpetrator deserved death. Great Udon's voice carried a basal violence, inspiring a surge in those who heard him. None but Gray noticed slight tweaks and electric pulses running through their Nexus suits. Gray ran through building after building, catching glimpses of people or creatures watching him from stores. He felt a jolt pulsing through his hand that reminded him of a cat trying to squeeze through a small space. He shifted the black sleeve over his arm repeatedly until a connection formed, causing his heart rate to accelerate and sweat to pour. The feeling vanished when the fabric shifted out of alignment. Gray realized they were using the Nexus suits to control emotions. He skidded to a stop at a dead end, cursed, turned back, ran another way, and encountered a gate with two guards in plate armor wielding large-bladed spears. The guards shifted positions and looked toward Gray like synchronized NPCs. A bad feeling struck him, and he sprinted with all his might. His form broke down as his legs overextended and arms flailed, but he felt trapped in a running loop. The gate doors began to close slowly, and Gray realized he would not make it. The heavy doors slammed shut before he reached them. His fists pounded on the walls without effect. Gray leapt back, scanning side to side. The knights continued staring but did not move. His gaze eyes landed on an outpost where a hidden mechanism room might control the gate. He sprinted to the side, nearly brushing a knight, found a hidden doorway, and yanked the knob with both hands, but it did not budge. He roared in his mind, furious, channeling his anger. Internally, he felt time slipping away with every breath. Cauldron threw his headset against a wall, cursing loudly. Cauldron had forgotten about the mechanism and considered it a waste. Joaquin held up a spear radiating white gold light around his neck, the chain and amulet flooding outward. A smaller young man questioned if this was the best use of the valuable item, but Joaquin's glance silenced him. Joaquin led an enraged mob toward a gray standing in the middle of the cobblestone road, who held two axes connected by a line of black fabric. Gray focused on the ground, breathing heavily, having tried to find a way out but ultimately failed. Near the back of the mob, Fitz and Ray followed. Ray avoided eye contact while Fitz blended into the crowd with a feigned fury. Joaquin told Gray that the girl did not deserve what he did to her. Gray erupted like a man with nothing to lose, fighting against the mob. He encountered a wall of lined spears, tried to make a path through, but was skewered from 6 sides, his organs damaged. Despite the wounds, Gray maintained a sense of humor as the light in his eyes dimmed. In his last moments, Gray heard footsteps and barely saw a handsome young man with olive skin and dirty blonde hair. Joaquin repeated that the girl did not deserve what Gray did to her and claimed to have used his reward as the first to arrive in the city to deal with Gray. Gray, barely able to lift his head, spat blood and loogie into Joaquin's nose. Joaquin stared into Gray's dimming eyes and raised his white gold spear, the last thing Gray saw. Gray shot up, eyes wide, breathing heavily, pressing a palm to his chest and then his neck. He experienced déjà vu fiercely and found himself standing in a familiar tunnel again. A subtle wind brushed against his fur-lined collar and tickled his jaw and cheek, snapping him out of his daze. Gray questioned if he had been sent back in time again and why. He noted that he had died faster this time because the gates closed, unlike the last time. Gray recalled that the pompous man who killed him implied it was because of a treasure he had for being the first to arrive at the city, possibly allowing control over the guards. Gray resolved that he could not let such a treasure fall into someone else's hands, but wondered how to clear the place fast enough to prevent that. He paused, shook his head, and sighed, debating whether to continue playing the game. Gray closed his eyes, clenched his fists until nearly drawing blood, and took deep breaths to settle himself. He concluded to keep going no matter what. Gray turned around, avoided the previous path, found a familiar nook, and sat in it. He waited, ears twitching to catch every sound, peeled off his fur-lined collar, and wrapped it around his wrists. He then heard soft footsteps without goblin chittering. Gray crouched on his toes, pressed his back toward the direction of the footsteps, and silently counted the steps. When he saw a shadow, Gray shot out and punched a man in the head. Ray, unprepared, could not swing his heavy sword. His head spun as he hit the floor, but Gray continued to strike without attempting to take Ray's weapon. Gray unleashed all his rage and frustration with relentless fists, blood coating his hands and face without stopping. Gray noticed Ray had stopped moving only when his breath turned into a harsh wind echoing through the tunnels. He stood, took Ray's long sword, and pierced it into the ground beside him before unzipping Ray's Nexis suit and slipping it onto his own wrist. Gray abandoned his fur-lined collar and put on the sturdier, longer Nexis suit. He moved down the tunnel, found a familiar fork where a goblin lay with an arrow in its gut, signs that Fitz had passed through. Gray hurried to the safe room door and touched it, but it did not open. He tried again, feeling no electrical pulses from the suit's nodes, and when he slammed his fist against the door, a ripple slammed back, nearly tearing his shoulder from its socket. A warning message appeared, indicating that any attempt to destroy Genesis game property would be punished. Gray winced from the pain, but knew killing random enemies wouldn't satisfy him. He heard footsteps and turned to see a young woman clutching a bloodied spear. May. She pleaded not to be hurt. Gray ordered her to open the door, pointing his sword at it. May hurried over, pressed her palm to the door, and vanished as it teleported her inside. Goblins swarmed toward Gray. He roared and swung Ray's long sword wildly, cutting them in two despite the pain in his shoulder. Afterward, he unzipped his pants and urinated over the goblin corpses, prompting another warning message for obscene gestures. Gray circled a large goblin, holding the long sword with both hands as the second goblin guard gurgled blood nearby. The large goblin lunged. Gray raised his sword and cut down, but the goblin crossed its twin axes above its head to block. Sparks flew as it closed the distance. Gray kicked out, but the goblin's armor emitted a pulsing light, and his heels slammed against a steel-like surface, nearly breaking his ankle. He stumbled back, weakening his attack, and the goblin swung an axe down at his leg. Gray dropped the long sword and let his arms unfurl as Ray's Nexis suit expanded. The axe blade cut into the suit and slammed against his thigh, but the suit buffered the blow, leaving only a shallow cut. Gray caught the blunt end of the axe in his palm and yanked it forward. The large goblin had been about to to swing its second axe, but Gray lifted it off its feet, throwing its balance completely off. The goblin was turned to the side and crashed along the ground, skidding to a stop as it tried to hop back up. Gray threw the Nexis suit at the goblin's face for cover. The goblin smacked the suit to the side with one of its axes, only to find the glittering tip of Gray's long sword thrusting right at it. The goblin tried to block but sprawled onto the ground and lacked leverage to use its second axe. It attempted to use the first axe to block, but Gray drove the long sword through the center of its chest with full body weight behind the thrust. Gray stumbled back, huffing for breath, and roared, clenching his fists. Gray dove for cover as the wiry gates clanged and nearly clipped him. He rolled to disperse the impact, having abandoned the longsword before rushing in. He gasped for breath and ground to a stop, then rolled to his side and up to his feet. Blood leaked from his arm, and tears and rips marked his floral suit. Gray chose to steal the double axes of the large goblin instead of taking the longsword into the boss room. At the door, Gray stared blankly at the perfectly smooth surface, noticing no cracks or dents from the blast. He questioned how the previous scattered blast had caused a crack while this concentrated one did not. Gray concluded that either a specific vulnerability existed in the door or something inside the room had caused the damage. He turned around and decided to search the room for an object capable of harming the door, narrowing the search to the area near the gate. Gray searched the encampment, knocking over crates and rummaging through debris and rubble. Smoke from a bomb drifted away from the gates, allowing tunnels to fill with diluting smoke that might delay fits. Gray stopped at the center of the encampment, wiped gel off his hand onto his floral suit, and cursed the stubborn residue. He slipped Ray's suit sleeve back over his hand and felt a strange tingling in his arm. He ripped the suit off as a sudden jolt of pain struck him. Gray noticed gel from his hair covering his wrist and forearm, pushed onto his skin by the inside mesh of the suit. He recalled that ultrasound gel helped sound waves travel between instrument and body and wondered if the gel helped the Nexus suit align with nodes. The pain felt like severe burns, and Gray realized he had narrowly avoided serious injury by removing the suit quickly. Gray rushed toward the boss door, dropped the axes taken from the dead large goblin, slid a hand through his hair, and slipped the arm of the suit back on. When he felt the first tingle, he pressed a hand to the door, but nothing happened. Then a click sounded. Gray felt a surge through his arm and screamed. He collapsed to a knee as jagged lines of scorched flesh tore upward, reaching his neck and chest, and he ripped the Nexus suit off again. The room was filled by a strong gust of wind as Gray was rushed inside. The doors slammed heavily behind him. Steam rose from the corners of the last goblin swordsman's lips as its rusted sword shifted slightly from its pinned position in the ground. Gray bit his tongue until it bled, his vision clearing enough to see the boss. He grabbed one of his axes from the ground, struggling to do the same with the other as blood poured down his arm, but he stood nonetheless. The last goblin's head rose to meet Gray's, its eyes flashing with flickering green flames. A pulse of emerald flames shot from its feet, forcing Gray to jump over the ring of fire and land on his feet. The last goblin raised its weapon with a sound of unsheathing steel, sank into a low attack stance, and lunged forward. Gray charged with two battle axes in hand. The sword thrust across the distance, and Gray collapsed to the ground to dodge, the weapon barely missing his scalp and taking strands of his hair. The goblin transitioned to a downward slash, and Gray landed on his back, blocking the attack. The last goblin pressed its blade past Gray's guard, pushing closer to his neck. Gray growled an incoherent curse, kicked out, and rammed his leg into the creature's shin, nearly breaking it. He rolled out from the side the goblin had weakened, abandoned his axes, lunged, and rolled to pick up Ray's Nexus suit. He turned to face the goblin, which had closed the distance, and turned the suit inside out. The goblin predicted Gray's movements and thrust through his stomach, the blade tearing through and scraping his inner organs. Blood flooded down his chin. Gray chuckled and slapped the goblin across the face with a palmful of gel. He stepped forward, wrapped the goblin in a bear hug, pressing the Nexus suit between them. The goblin screamed in searing pain, bit Gray's shoulder, but Gray held on as the burning ran through him. Cauldron tapped on a familiar screen, swiped several times, formed a light pink envelope, scribbled notes, and sent it to Guard. The envelope reached Guard's notifications, and he clicked on it. Guard noted that the last goblin swordsman was quite rare, and that it had only happened once before. Rare instances referred to any divergent path the Genesis games took with less than a 5% chance of occurring. Tutorial zones were designed as controlled environments, making these instances harder to trigger. Goblins occupied an especially weak starting position. All tutorial zones contained weak creatures, but some had less developed lore. While the playing field was kept even, differences remained. Kobolds, especially the lizard types, carried draconic blood, making them closer to powerful ancestors. Goblins, in contrast, were far removed from their warring ancestors, about as strong as children of most races, requiring minimal adjustments in tutorial zones. If the audience had not grown bored of seeing the same creature repeatedly, it would have been more cost-effective to use goblins in all tutorial zones. The Genesis games rarely allowed the goblin ancestral line to awaken because their weakness required complex stimulation. Associate producer Guard rewound Gray's journey to find what triggered the rare instance but found no obvious path. By the time Guard concluded there was no trigger, Gray was clinging to the last goblin, dying as he was burned. Gray's breath came in shallow wheezes. His body was likely covered in burns shaped like lightning streaks. His eyes fused shut. He could not move and felt every aspect of his pain until his last breath. A creaking sound came as heavy wooden doors opened, followed by a woman's scream, the same scream Gray had heard replayed before. A harsh whisper ordered silence. Gray recognized the voice as the archer he had been avoiding. After a silence, footsteps approached noisily. Fitz spoke softly, realizing there was no danger, and noted the pile before them as rewards. May remained silent, staring at the burnt pile. Gray had welded himself to the last goblin. Their forms were a brown and black mass with rust-colored blood. Fitz whispered about an epic loot box, questioning its rarity. Gray could not reply or open loot boxes. Others would benefit from his death. He felt fury. The pile shifted and Fitz yelped. An arrow hit the last goblin fused on Gray, causing it to quiver but not hurt him. A second arrow pierced Gray's arm, forcing his mind into clarity. Enraged, Gray opened his mouth, ripping apart his lips as his jaw unhinged. Before he could finish, a third arrow pierced his skull, ending his words. Gray stood over Ray's corpse, his eyes hard to read, blood dripping from his knuckles. He clenched his fists, causing the blood flow to quicken, indicating it was not only Ray's blood. He bent down to pull Ray's sword from his palm to strip the Nexus suit again, but felt a jolt through his body. Gray dropped the sword and scrambled back, nearly hitting the wall, breathing erratically. After several seconds, he realized he had overreacted, mistaking the jolt for the burning flame sensation. He grasped his chest, clutching his floral suit and fur-lined collar as if to tear through them. He questioned why he felt this way, feeling anger but knowing it had lasted too long. He reflected on second chances and how repeated failures were pathetic. Gray sat for a while, then pushed himself up, slamming a fist against the wall, causing more blood to trickle. He kicked Ray's hand aside, picked up the sword, and felt another jolt. This time, he squeezed the hilt tightly, almost thinking he would crush it. He noted the sword felt lighter than before, like a thin fencing sword. He swung the blade, feeling it sing through the air. The sword stopped abruptly, and Gray pointed it outward. He heard a melody in his ears as if the blade was reacting to him, though it made no sense. Gray swung the sword again more loosely, and the sound disappeared. He swung it once more, letting the blade guide him, and the song returned to his ears. He stood in silence before grinning wildly and decided to test this out. Across from a familiar large goblin, Gray's feet glided around it with a more even and balanced stance. The large goblin lunged at him, but Gray's eyes flashed and his body reacted on instinct. He thrust the blade forward, piercing between the brows of the goblin, which convulsed once before collapsing without its twin axes reaching Gray. Gray noted the short time since killing Ray and how none of the goblins faced had lasted more than a single exchange. He turned toward the wiry gates and decided to attempt something crazy, knowing he had a time buffer before Fitz and May would arrive. He bent down, picked up one of the large goblin's axes, and felt a jolt run through him. Swinging the axe with his offhand, he heard the familiar singing in his ears and realized it wasn't just with the sword. His grin grew wider. Gray kicked open the wiry gates, heard the screeching of female and child goblins, stepped forward, and threw the axe. The axe arched through the air as a melody played in his ears. When a female goblin peeked from behind a crate, the axe split its head in two. He kicked up the large goblin's second axe with his foot, caught it, and threw it with the same violent heave and fluid motion, splitting another skull. He laughed as he moved through the hallways, killing goblins before they could blow things up. After finishing with the encampment goblins, Gray paused and considered the change in his body. He suspected it related to the last goblin swordsman, but since that figure had died, he wondered why everything hadn't reset. He realized memories were sequences of neurons and speculated that changes to his neural network might persist beyond death. He felt his reflexes and skill had taken a massive leap forward, not his physical strength, explaining why battles were easier. Finding no one to confirm his thoughts, Gray began searching around crates. Finding nothing on the floor or in tents, he used an axe blade to pry open crates one by one. He mostly found scrap metal and dysfunctional warheads, none active. He noted the goblins must have scavenged parts to build smoke bombs and pipe bombs, but lacking engineering skills, the materials were useless to him. He acknowledged he had been taking a gap year before college, fixing trucks and tractors, but this was beyond his expertise. After finding nothing, he decided to check the goblin corpses. Gray sifted through the corpses, noting the minimal clothing worn by male and female goblins. He found nothing useful until he stopped over the corpse of a child goblin, goblin, smaller than the others with smoother features and fewer tongue pockmarks, indicating youth. Gray split the child goblin's chest with an axe without hesitation. He did not know where these goblins came from or if they had been ripped from their world like him, but he knew it was either him or them, and he would always choose himself. He noticed a shiny ring on the child goblin's finger and squatted down to touch it. A familiar jolt ran through his body, the same feeling he had experienced whenever he picked up a weapon since arriving in the tutorial zone. The ring registered as something he should be able to wield. Gray peeled the ring off the child goblin's finger and put it on his pinky, where it barely fit. The ring resized itself and pricked his finger painfully. A strong suction force drew from his pinky, making him feel as if all his blood was being drained. When the suction stopped and reversed, a flashing screen appeared before him for the first time outside the opening ceremony of the Genesis games. The screen displayed the name Prometheus and asked if he wanted to enter the introduction phase. Gray wondered if it was a tutorial and decided to accept it. The world warped around him, and a status screen appeared showing his name as Gray Temult, frame as Prometheus, and 1 pending quest. It listed his stats, all at 10, and revealed that he had awakened the mind enhancement ability Goblin Warlord Spirit to level 1. Gray questioned the meaning of the screen, the name Prometheus, the sync rate, and the pending quest. The screen then displayed the quest details: Operation Spark Flame, quest rank common, mission type technician, loops remaining 1, objective to craft a titan frame, description explaining that the Prometheus spirit lacked a vessel and would flame out without one, reward to complete the introduction phase, and punishment as flame extinguishment. Gray was baffled by the quest and the terminology. He struggled to gather information needed to complete the quest but could not. Suddenly, he began to cough violently, a spike of pain ripping through his throat. At the encampment, Cauldron, the assistant producer, noticed Gray frozen in place despite being close to finishing the tutorial zone. Cauldron accessed the inventory list and found no record of the ring among allocated items. He realized it was a Genesis item, a rare and powerful item born from the Genesis battlefield itself, capable of changing the game's landscape. Cauldron quickly sent a warning message labeled Genesis item. Fitz appeared at the encampment entrance, raised his bow, and loosed an arrow at Gray's back. Gray choked, raised a hand to his throat, and barely made eye contact with Fitz. Fitz loosed a second arrow, which pierced between Gray's brows, and the world went black. A message appeared stating Gray had died and that there would be no next time. Gray slammed his fist against the cave wall, frustrated at dying in such a stupid way and having no one to blame but himself. He realized he had not been aware of his surroundings after picking up the ring and had been standing exactly where he found it when Fitz attacked. He also noted that despite possessing the ring, he still could not wield a weapon, as his hand phased through them like before, dashing his hopes that the ring could replace the Nexis suit. Gray forced himself to calm down. The screen displayed loops remaining 0, confirming that he had no loops left and could not die again. He understood the punishment of flame extinguishment referred to the Prometheus spirit and that his revivals were tied to these loops. Gray suspected the situation was more complicated, but without the complete introduction phase as a reward or the necessary information from the device, all he could do was guess. He pivoted on his foot and dashed away. Less than a minute later, Gray bent over Ray's corpse, pulled his body out of the Nexus suit, then turned and rushed to the safe room, taking Ray's longsword with him. At the safe room door, Gray ran a hand through his hair to apply gel, then slid the sleeve of the Nexus suit over his gel-covered hand despite the burning sensation. He pressed his palm to the door and shouted for it to open. The door clicked softly, and Gray was forcefully teleported inside. He stumbled but caught himself, then hurriedly ripped off the Nexus suit, revealing his arm burning with patterns of lightning. He took deep breaths to soothe the pain before looking up at Fitz. The safe room resembled a bar with flashing stainless steel surfaces. Fitz sat on a stool at the bar, and across from him stood a giant frog-like creature with a double chin. Fitz looked at Gray warily but attempted a smile and greeting. Gray addressed the barkeep frog, asking if it was the information wizard. The barkeep G, confirmed he was the guide for tutorial zone 1132 to 234 and acknowledged the existence of a reward for clearing the tutorial quickly. Gray requested speed and quickness, and a petite young woman named May appeared by his side. She explained that during the tutorial all timers were frozen, so there was no need to rush. Gray inquired about replacement gear that fit him. Barkeep G apologized, stating replacement Nexus suits must be purchased and were expensive. Frustrated, Gray activated the tutorial without delay. He recalled dying in the city because the Holy Knight bastard had controlled the gates to prevent his escape, likely due to finishing the game first and receiving a reward he used against Gray. Gray resolved not to let that happen again and to clear the tutorial quest despite distrust and uncertainty. Standing in a white room, a screen appeared with 3 categories: rules, common inquiries, and another. He skipped rules and browsed common inquiries, learning about loot boxes, treasures, monster divisions, and rankings from common to legendary, with hints of higher level items. items. He paused at information about Nexis suits, confirming they were mesh fibers externalizing the neural network, tailored to the wearer, enabling interaction with the Genesis game user interface, and allowing the body to evolve through stat gains and ability progression. Gray realized he couldn't improve stats without the suit and doubted the ring could replace it after failing to procure a weapon. He reviewed the user maintenance section, noting that proper maintenance was the driver's responsibility, as heavy usage could weaken nodes and reduce the sync rate. The term sync rate caught his attention because it appeared on his Prometheus status screen. He speculated the frame he needed to build might be a Nexus suit. His current sync rate read, "not applicable," suggesting the item the ring needed to interact with did not yet exist. He also noticed his energy reserve was not applicable, but the Nexus suit introduction did not mention energy or reserves. The warning explained that it was very rare for two individuals' bodies to be perfectly compatible, even identical twins or those with similar body types, and attempting to use another's Nexus suit would result in failure or poor sync, with potential nerve and body damage. Gray concluded that he was in trouble but noticed a line stating that similar body types did not matter. He found a note saying that in worst-case scenarios where using another's Nexus suit was necessary, one should check for compatible sync, which was impossible without expert knowledge. A layman could only test if the suit reacted to their neural network without bridge substances. Gray recalled that he had felt a jolt when touching May's suit without using hair gel, but he rejected the idea of using someone else's suit to avoid suspicion and risk. He realized that without a usable Nexus suit, acquiring items or information about frames would be impossible. He cursed repeatedly, forced himself to breathe, and resolved not to harm an innocent woman unless attacked first. Gray skimmed through the rest of the tutorial until he reached the category named Paths. He noted that the first category described the status screen, similar to his own but missing the frame, sync rate, and energy reserve sections, and explained the stats. He saw a category called Technician, which his pending quest screen had listed as his mission type. The tutorial described technicians as non-combat specialists focused on integrating technology with users, likening the role to a mechanic but involving alien biotechnology beyond Gray's understanding. It presented technician as an entry-level position leading to something larger, though it did not specify what. The tutorial pinned a city map with 3 locations to learn technician skills, but these places required city acknowledgement through registration. Gray realized he needed to register while avoiding being targeted again, but previous registration with May's Nexus suit had been risky and might not work with Ray's suit. He stopped himself from complaining and decided to act faster to improve his finish timer and possibly earn needed rewards. Before leaving, Gray checked the rare instances section, which listed events that interested the audience and could grow a fan base and sponsors. He dismissed the idea of performing for the audience, feeling that provoking them was more effective. He then found the Genesis instances section, noting these were not listed in the inventory and questioned how unlisted items appeared. Genesis instances greatly increased popularity and survival chances because producers bent rules to keep holders alive. Gray sensed a deeper mystery about the game's nature but found no answers. He ended the tutorial, distrusting its information and ignoring the rules, focusing on adapting quickly and provoking others. Gray exited the tutorial. At the safe room shop, he ignored the barkeep's greeting and left immediately. After teleporting, he heard chittering and instinctively swung Ray's long sword, decapitating 2 enemies with a clean slice. He collected their daggers and tucked them into his boxers, planning to use his improved throwing accuracy for mental enhancement. Gray sprinted, his hair and floral suit whipping in the wind. He rounded a corner sharply, pulled a knife from his waist, and felt a jolt through his arm and pain from his burnt arm but endured it. He knew he could not throw the dagger from that distance because it would veer off course due to imbalance. By the time Gray finished his thoughts, he was able to throw the dagger accurately. He sent the dagger spinning from his palm just as a goblin turned to face him, the weapon piercing its eye socket before it could react. Gray swept past the goblin's companions, decapitating one with his long sword as he sprinted by. He paused to catch his breath, then bent down to arrange the 3 remaining pipe bombs, setting the smoke bombs aside. Standing tall, Gray slicked back his hair with gel, slipped on the sleeve of Ray's Nexus suit, and pressed his palm to the door. The spike of pain came quickly, followed by the door's click. He ripped off the sleeve and started the timer on the pipe bombs as the door swung open. A rush of wind pushed him inside before the doors slammed shut behind him, sending the bombs tumbling across the ground. Inside the room, Gray faced the last goblin swordsman, the final boss carrying the forgotten pride of a fallen race. The goblin swordsman embodied the memory of a once-honored being with royal blood and warlord spirit. Gray curled into a fetal position as the bombs detonated, crashing against the doors in the confined space. When the smoke cleared, he saw the last goblin swordsman's corpse, missing a leg and with its chest blasted open, sinking to the ground like a puppet without strings. Shimmering lights formed over the corpse, solidifying into 3 hovering loot boxes, 2 dull bronze and 1 silvery with orange-yellow undertones, indicating an epic loot box among rare ones. The ground rumbled and an entrance opened, but Gray remained still, weighing whether to open the boxes. His left arm was close to useless from burning, and maintaining contact during the long opening animation was risky. He considered the possibility of others benefiting from his loot, especially Fitz, the archer who had repeatedly thwarted him and killed him in previous loops. Despite his anger, Gray knew he needed the Nexus suit for an upcoming task and couldn't afford the risk. He decided to gamble and walked past the loot boxes down the stairs. The system congratulated him as the 113th contestant to clear the tutorial zone. The results assigned him to Zone 234 and granted a one-time use reward, the City Edict. Gray found himself spawned into a familiar city square, alone. The City Edict appeared in his palm as a golden scroll, heavier than expected. He unfurled the edict and used it to register himself. A glow descended, forming a complex seal shaped like a chimera, which stamped down and vanished along with the scroll. Cauldron watched Gray with interest, noting the candidate's suspicious speed and skill, likely enhanced by mental enhancements. Mental enhancements were much harder to obtain than body abilities or mental reinforcements and resistances, and only the very best of Earth would start receiving them after several days. Only an executive producer could access a player's status page. Associate producer guard could do so on rare occasions, but only by spending valuable tokens. After seeing Gray use a valuable item to register, Cauldron decided not to send an envelope yet, thinking Gray had wasted it foolishly. Cauldron typed and sent a pale yellow envelope to guard, distracted and unaware that Gray had immediately started running. Gray, unaware of the attention he had drawn, recalled the tutorial map and ran toward a technician profession hub. About 2 minutes later, Gray stopped in front of a small shop nestled between two large brick homes, with gears, metals, and parts hanging outside. Gray pushed aside heavy velvet curtains acting as the door and called out. Clanging sounds and someone falling echoed before hazard lights flashed from inside the dark shop. Gray quickly retreated, gripping Ray's long sword tightly. The lights faded and a small gnome with rough gray skin, mechanical jaw parts, and multiple piercings peeked out. The gnome asked what Gray wanted. Gray said he wanted to learn to become a technician. The gnome replied that Gray had to be registered first, but then noted the fast registration was unusual. The gnome asked where Gray's Nexus suit was, explaining it was needed to trigger the quest and that failure meant finding another tutor. Only 2 attempts were allowed. Gray said he was ready. The gnome warned Gray not to use his current gel, saying its chemical structure and resistance would cause internal damage during the process. Gray decided to try the other 2 shops instead and left without asking about the correct gel. He planned to cross the city square to observe new arrivals and estimate when Great Udon might return. As Gray neared the city square, he heard a whistling arrow but did not stop, rounding a corner. The arrow struck May, who fell with fading light in her eyes. Fitz moved toward May but froze, turning his gaze toward Gray. Fitz drew another arrow, clearly wanting to hide his involvement. Gray backed away cautiously, watching Fitz. Gray had seen Fitz's deadly shots before, knowing Fitz was skilled with a bow. Gray dodged as Fitz released the arrow, rolling up as it clanged against cobblestones. Fitz panicked, trying to load another arrow, but Gray disappeared behind a building. Fitz hesitated, then rushed back to May. He pulled the arrow from her eye socket and ran its blade across her neck, attempting to disguise the arrow as the cause of death. Previously, Fitz had left wounds as they were partly due to panic and the fact that the tutorial zone was supposedly a one-way area. Fitz realized that anyone entering Zone 234 would spawn at this location, and he did not want others to suspect him of killing May. He hurriedly put the bloody arrow back in his quiver and pulled on something around May's neck. Gray heard footsteps behind him and sprinted toward Fitz. Fitz turned and panicked, trying to draw a new arrow, but his hands were slick with blood and clumsy. Gray closed the distance to 10 meters before Fitz managed to knock an arrow. Fitz fired the arrow when Gray was 3 meters away. Gray's Nexus suit formed a net between his arms, but the arrow pierced through the suit and into his chest. Gray wheezed and lunged forward, swinging Ray's sword down in a wild arc, striking Fitz's head. Gray ripped the arrow from his chest and roared. He noted the durability of the Nexus suit and the starter weapons. He assessed the wound as a flesh wound, helped by his physical conditioning. Gray felt something was wrong with Ray's suit and decided to move quickly. He saw May's mutilated corpse and did not want to linger. He unzipped his pants and urinated on Fitz's corpse, then flipped a middle finger to the sky. He picked up Ray's longsword and began removing Fitz's clothes, then proceeded to disrobe May. Gray noticed a necklace on May that had not been there before and quickly removed it. He decided to leave immediately and dashed away. A trio appeared in the square. Joaquin noticed Gray vanishing and heard a scream. The woman in their group pointed to the mutilated corpses. Joaquin silenced her and urged caution, warning about possible threats. The woman broke down in sobs on Joaquin's chest. Gray exhaled after after navigating 3 intersections. He sensed the city square had changed as he left. He carried many items and was uncertain if taking Fitz's bow and arrow was a mistake, as he did not feel his goblin warlord spirit mental enhancement activating with the long-range weapon. He wondered if the weapon was not high-level enough, though it allowed him to throw things. Gray had no idea how he had obtained the mental enhancement or how to level it up. He assumed that fusing his flesh with the last goblin had caused it, but that was just his own theory. He knew that without a Nexis suit, he probably wouldn't be able to level up anything until he completed the introduction for the ring on his pinky finger, which required May's Nexis suit. Gray took the risk of staying inside the technician's shop, knowing other players couldn't enter without registering. He hoped to finish and figure out how to build the vessel Prometheus needed before others arrived from registering to have more options for protection. He skidded to a stop in front of the gnome's shop, carrying many items and looking like a hoarder. The gnome asked why he was there again, but Gray ignored it and dumped everything on the ground except Fitz's Nexus suit, asking if this would work. The gnome seemed about to answer but pressed its lips shut. Gray noticed the lips looked pressed together by invisible fingers but saw no one around. The gnome told Gray there was no one there and that he would have to figure things out himself. A pillar of light appeared in the distance as new people arrived, so Gray hurried, dropped Fitz's Nexus suit, picked up May's, and pulled it over his forearm. He decided not to waste time on Fitz's suit, knowing logically there were still hours before everyone arrived and an announcement could be made about him, but he didn't want to take chances. He took a deep breath and stepped back, despite his adrenaline and the blood running down his chest from an arrow wound he had forgotten. Gray closed his eyes, focused on his breath, and recalled that his problem was not nervousness but needing controlled madness, like in MMA, where strategy was as important as grit. He reminded himself this was just a new match, longer and with more moves but still a match. His eyes snapped open with a red glow that made the gnome's finger twitch but remain restricted by something invisible. Gray exhaled, recalled the last time he felt a response from May's Nexus suit, and shifted it incrementally, tugging on the fabric. A subtle feeling grew stronger until it snapped into place. He told the gnome to hurry and let him try. He moved his arm slowly to keep the fabric exact and knew he had succeeded even before final results. Cauldron watched these events from his perch, repeatedly returning his attention to Gray. He started and stopped writing an envelope to guard several times, unsure what to write. Cauldron thought Gray would be the perfect heel, a madman the audience would love to hate, gaining a fan base of madmen and women. He hesitated because Gray's value was too good to let him flame out early, which would leave them with nothing. His eyes landed on Joaquin, who had triggered a rare instance and would have finished first if not for Gray. An idea came to Cauldron, and he grinned while looking at the girl crying in Joaquin's arms. Gray received a notification that he had been accepted under the tutelage of Glob the technician. Gray blinked and asked where the test was. Glob said Gray had already passed it. Gray asked what he had done. Glob explained that being a technician required a special sixth sense few possessed, and Gray had surpassed the minimum threshold. Glob mentioned a briefing on Gray's world, Earth, calling the name stupid. Gray tried not to roll his eyes. Glob said the sixth sense was like soul, quantum entanglement, genetics, something Gray didn't understand. Gray asked what any of that was supposed to mean. Glob said Gray did not need to know more and that it was called cyberstate. Gray grumbled that it was a stupid name. Glob laughed abruptly and invited Gray inside, mentioning a limited number of credits for teaching and that the usefulness depended on Gray himself. Minutes later, Gray sat in front of a sturdy mat resembling grid paper, tapping his finger as he waited for Glob. Glob appeared from behind curtains, dropping a collection of parts resembling a gutted car engine with oils, pipes, fixtures, and what looked like an exhaust. Glob explained that Gray needed to learn to collaborate with the cyberstate to identify parts, their functions, and faults. Success would grant the technician profession and direct interface with the Genesis system. Glob said this would act like a handy assistant anywhere. Gray asked if this required a Nexus suit. Glob replied no, explaining that the cybermat served this purpose, projecting the cyberstate into the real world to draw maps, diagrams, and blueprints visible to others or used as references. Gray grew impatient and asked if he could decide what Glob taught him, since his credits were limited. Glob agreed but advised against it. Gray insisted, asking about frames and expressing his desire to build one. Glob said frames, as in mech frames, were beyond a technician's scope and only mech engineers could build them. Mech engineers could build their own interface methods and would not need a Nexus suit. Gray asked if he needed a full mech frame or just a vessel, uncertain of the difference. Glob did not reply. Gray thought he was trapped and spinning his wheels, feeling worse off than before reincarnating. Gray noticed Glob frozen in place. He hurriedly stood, pulled on May's suit, adjusted it for forearm coverage, and stumbled, touching the cyber mat. A jolt ran through him, amplifying his ability to sense neural network connections to the suit. He locked May's Nexus suit into place and received a notification. The notification read that Gray had triggered a rare instance. Operation Second Wind of the Mechanical Jaw Lineage, a rare-ranked retrieval mission to reclaim the ancestral tome of the Mechanical Jaw from the wicked forest which outside the reward was the path of the Mechanical Jaw. Gray roared in frustration.